The evening was calm, but Sandra Bullock's heart was not. She had just returned home after a long day on set, and something inside her felt strangely heavy. The world knew her as strong, confident, and radiant. But behind those closed doors, she carried loneliness that no one could see. She sat on her couch staring at her phone, scrolling through old photos of friends and co-stars. And then her eyes stopped on one picture. It was of her and Keanu Reeves taken many years ago. Both were smiling, both looked carefree, as if nothing in the world could ever shake them. Sandra felt her chest tighten because she remembered how kind Keanu had always been, even when no cameras were around. The memory came back like a wave. Once, during a tiring shoot, Sandra had fallen sick. Everyone was rushing, everyone was worried about schedules. But Keanu had quietly sat next to her, offering her water, telling her she could rest as long as she needed. He never made a big gesture. He never tried to be noticed. But the way he looked at her with genuine care was something she had never forgotten. Now, years later, she felt that memory burn brighter than ever. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. A message. Her eyes widened as she read it. "Hey, Sandra, I was thinking about you today. I want to see you. Can I come by?" It was Keanu. She froze. So many years had passed, yet his words felt so warm, so close. She typed back slowly, her fingers trembling. "Yes, come." She paced around her living room, trying to calm herself. Why was she nervous? He was just a friend, but something inside told her this night would not be ordinary. When the doorbell rang, her heart skipped a beat. She opened the door, and there he was. Keanu Reeves, humble as always, wearing a simple jacket, holding a small box in his hands. His smile was soft, but his eyes carried something deeper, almost hidden. "Hi, Sandra," he said, his voice quiet, almost shy. "Hi, Keanu," she replied, trying to sound calm. "Come in." They sat together in the living room. For a moment, there was silence, only the ticking of a small clock on the wall. Then Keanu placed the box on the table between them. Sandra stared at it, confused. It was wrapped so neatly, but not in a flashy way, just plain paper tied with a simple string. "I wanted to give you something," Keanu said, his voice gentle. "It's not about value. It's about what it means." Sandra hesitated. She slowly reached out, her hands trembling, and untied the string. As she opened the box, her breath caught in her throat. Inside was a small object she could not immediately understand. It was a notebook, old but carefully kept. On the first page, in Keanu's handwriting, were words that made her eyes fill with tears. "To Sandra, because kindness lasts longer than fame. You once told me you feared being forgotten. I never forgot." Her hand shook. She closed the notebook, pressing it to her chest. "Keanu, why would you—" "This is too much," he shook his head. "It's not too much. It's the truth. You showed me kindness when I was at my lowest years ago, when the world was not gentle with me. This is only a way to tell you that I remember." Sandra could not speak. Her throat felt tight. Her eyes blurred with tears. She had always known Keanu was different, but this moment showed her a side of him few ever saw. Humility, respect, gratitude, all wrapped in one simple gesture. But then, just as the emotion filled the room, a sudden knock echoed at the door. Both turned their heads. It was unexpected, almost too sharp, too sudden. Sandra looked at Keanu, who seemed calm but alert. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked softly. "No," she whispered. The knock came again, louder this time. Sandra felt her heart race. Something about it felt unusual, almost unsettling. She slowly stood up, but Keanu gently placed his hand on her arm. "Wait, let me check." He walked to the door with steady steps. Sandra held the notebook tightly in her arms, her breath uneven. Who could it be? Why now? Keanu opened the door and froze. His eyes widened, and for the first time that evening, he looked shocked. Someone was standing there, someone neither of them expected to see. The figure at the door stood still, almost like a shadow from the past. Sandra's breath caught in her throat when she saw who it was. It was Daniel, the son of a woman she had once helped during a charity project many years ago. He was no longer a child. He was tall now, with sharp eyes filled with both sadness and hope. His clothes were simple, and his hands clutched a worn-out notebook, edges torn, pages yellowed. "I am sorry for coming like this," Daniel said quietly, his voice trembling. "But I had nowhere else to go." "They told me you lived here, Miss Sandra." Sandra's eyes softened, though confusion swirled within her. "Daniel, I remember you." "Your mother, Maria. Are you all right? Why are you here so suddenly?" Keanu stood beside her, his hand resting gently on the doorframe, his calm gaze fixed on the boy. There was no judgment in his eyes, only concern. He stepped aside, giving space for Daniel to enter. The boy walked in hesitantly, his eyes scanning the warm living room before falling on the box and notebook on the table. "I didn't mean to disturb," he whispered, his shoulders tense. "You're not disturbing," Keanu said softly. "Sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who truly belong in the moment." Sandra led Daniel to the couch, her mind spinning. The night had already been overwhelming with Keanu's unexpected gift, but now the arrival of Daniel felt like fate was weaving something larger, something beyond her understanding. She noticed the notebook in his hand and gently asked, "What is that you're holding?" Daniel hesitated, clutching it tighter. This was my mother's. She's sick now. Very sick. She told me once that if I ever needed help, I should find you. She said you were the only person who listened when no one else cared." Those words pierced Sandra's heart. She remembered Maria well, a quiet, gentle woman who had struggled to provide for her son during difficult times. Sandra had met her during a visit to a community shelter. She had donated money, food, and more importantly, her time. She had sat with Maria, listened to her fears, and even played with little Daniel, who had shyly handed her a small paper flower he had folded with his tiny hands. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "How is she now?" Daniel's voice broke. "She's weak. She barely eats. The doctor said she needs treatment we cannot afford. I didn't know where else to turn, so I came here hoping you might remember us." Silence filled the room, heavy and raw. Sandra pressed her hand to her lips, her chest aching. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "You did the right thing by coming," he said firmly, looking at Daniel with steady eyes. "Kindness never disappears. It only waits for the right time to return." Daniel's eyes flickered with a fragile hope. Sandra wiped her tears and leaned closer. "You are not alone, Daniel. We'll find a way to help your mother. I promise." But deep inside, fear tugged at her. Promises were easy to make. But would she be able to keep this one? The clock ticked louder in the silence that followed. Sandra excused herself for a moment and stepped into the kitchen to gather her thoughts. Keanu followed, sensing her inner storm. "This feels overwhelming," Sandra whispered, leaning against the counter. "He came here out of nowhere, Keanu. What if I can't help? What if I let him down?" Keanu's voice was steady, calm as a river. "Sandra, I gave you a notebook tonight to remind you that kindness never fades. This is that lesson in real life. You have a chance to remind Daniel that his mother was right to believe in you. It's not about saving the world. It's about being there for one soul when it matters." Her eyes searched his, trembling with both fear and gratitude. "But what if I fail?" "Then you'll fail with love in your heart," he replied softly. "And sometimes that is enough." His words sank deep into her soul. She nodded, wiping her eyes. They returned to the living room together, where Daniel sat hunched, staring at the floor. Sandra knelt before him, her hand resting gently on his knee. "We will visit your mother," she said firmly. "Tonight. I want to see her with my own eyes." Daniel's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across his face. You would do that?" Sandra smiled through her tears. "Of course. Your mother once trusted me with her fears. I won't let her face this alone now." Keanu stood tall beside them, his presence quiet yet powerful. "Let's go," he said simply. The three of them left the house together, stepping into the cool night air. The streets were silent, but the weight of their mission filled the air with tension. Sandra walked with determination, Keanu steady at her side, Daniel leading the way. As they approached a small apartment building on the edge of town, Sandra felt her heart tighten. The place looked worn, walls cracked, paint peeling. Daniel opened the door quietly and led them inside. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and quiet suffering. In the corner of a dimly lit room lay Maria, frail and pale, her breathing shallow. Sandra froze. The once strong woman she remembered was now a fragile shadow. Maria's eyes opened slowly, and when she saw Sandra and Keanu standing there, a faint smile touched her lips. "You came?" Maria whispered, her voice weak but filled with gratitude. Sandra rushed to her side, taking her hand gently. "Of course I came. You're not alone." Keanu stood at the doorway, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. He watched Sandra lean over Maria, whispering words of comfort, her tears falling freely. The boy stood behind them, hope returning to his young face. And in that fragile moment, surrounded by suffering yet bound by kindness, something unspoken passed between them all. It was not just about illness, or help, or promises. It was about humanity. About standing together when the world seemed too heavy to bear alone. But then Maria's weak voice broke the silence again. "Sandra, there is something I must tell you. Something I never told anyone." Her words trembled in the air, heavier than the sickness that weighed on her body. Sandra leaned closer, holding her breath. Maria's lips trembled as if every word cost her the little strength she still had. Sandra leaned closer, holding her hand gently, while Daniel looked on with wide, frightened eyes. Keanu stayed silent, but his calm presence filled the room with a quiet strength. The night outside was silent, as though the world itself was waiting for Maria to speak. "Sandra," Maria whispered, her voice fragile as a leaf in the wind. "Years ago, when you came to the shelter, I told you only part of my story. There is something I never revealed, something I thought I could carry alone. But I cannot leave this world without telling you." Sandra's heart pounded, fear and curiosity twisting together. "Maria, you don't have to force yourself. Just rest. We're here now." But Maria shook her head slowly. "No, you must know." She turned her weak gaze toward Daniel. "My son doesn't know either. I hid it from him all these years." Daniel stepped closer, his voice shaking. "Mother, what do you mean?" "What is it?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel! The man you always believed was your father. He wasn't the one who left us. He wasn't the one who abandoned us. The truth is, your father never even knew you were born." Daniel froze. His hands gripped the old notebook tighter, and his voice cracked. "What are you saying?" "Then who is he?" Maria's lips trembled again, but before she could speak, a harsh cough shook her entire body. Sandra quickly reached for a glass of water, lifting her gently, her own tears spilling as she whispered, "It's all right. Maria, breathe. We're here with you." Keanu stepped forward, kneeling on the other side of the bed, steadying Maria's trembling frame with quiet strength. "Don't force it all out at once," he said softly. "Your truth will come when you're ready." Maria caught her breath after a long moment, then whispered, "Daniel's father. He was someone important, someone who carried kindness like a shield, but also someone who lived in shadows. I wanted to protect Daniel, but now he deserves to know. You all deserve to know." Before she could continue, her voice broke again, and her eyes closed for a moment as if exhaustion had claimed her. Fear rushed into the room, but then her hand tightened weakly around Sandra's. "Promise me," Maria whispered faintly. "Promise me you'll take care of him. Promise me you'll make sure Daniel knows the truth." Sandra's tears ran freely as she pressed her forehead against Maria's hand. "I promise. I will protect him, and I will find the truth. You can rest knowing we will not abandon him." Daniel stood frozen, confusion and sorrow clashing in his young eyes. Why would you hide this from me, Mother?" Maria's tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "Because I didn't want your heart to grow heavy with secrets. I wanted you to grow with hope, not pain." Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside the small apartment. Heavy, slow, deliberate steps. Keanu's head turned sharply, his body tense, alert like a guardian sensing danger. "Did you expect anyone?" he asked Daniel quickly. The boy shook his head, fear filling his eyes. The footsteps drew nearer. A shadow moved across the thin curtain that covered the window. Sandra's heart raced. The night that had begun with a quiet gift and turned into an emotional reunion was now unfolding into something more mysterious, more dangerous. Keanu stood and moved to the door silently, his every step deliberate, his eyes steady. He placed his hand gently on the knob but did not open it yet. He looked back at Sandra and Daniel. "Stay close to her," he whispered. The knocking came suddenly, sharp, demanding. Sandra jumped, clutching Maria's hand tighter. Daniel's eyes darted to the door, fear surging. Keanu opened the door slowly, carefully. Standing there was an older man, dressed in worn clothes but with eyes that carried weight, history and something unspoken. He looked directly at Daniel, then at Maria lying weakly on the bed, and his face twisted with both guilt and sorrow. His voice broke the heavy silence. "So, it's true, Maria. After all these years, you never told him." Daniel's body went rigid. "What do you mean?" "Who are you?" Maria's weak voice trembled from the bed. "Daniel, this is the man I never told you about. This is your father." The words crashed into the room like thunder. Daniel staggered back, clutching his notebook as if it were his only anchor. Sandra's eyes widened, shock freezing her in place. Keanu remained still, but his eyes narrowed, studying the man with silent intensity. The older man stepped inside, his hands shaking, his eyes never leaving the boy he had never known. "I came because I could not carry the silence anymore. I needed to see him, before it is too late." Daniel's lips parted, but no words came out. The air was thick with confusion, grief, and a storm of emotions no one was prepared for. And in that fragile, broken moment, everyone in the room realized that the night had only just begun to reveal its secrets. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the man who had just stepped into the room. His chest rose and fell quickly, as if the air itself was too heavy to breathe. The word father echoed in his ears again and again, but it felt impossible to accept. For so many years, he had lived with the story that his father had abandoned him. Now, in one single moment, everything was different. Maria's frail voice trembled as she tried to sit up. "His name is Thomas," she whispered, her breath uneven. "Daniel, I wanted to protect you. I was afraid of what the truth would do to your heart." Daniel's hands shook as he clutched the notebook tighter. His voice cracked, filled with both anger and confusion. "You told me he left us. You told me he didn't want us. Why would you lie to me?" Tears slid down Maria's pale cheeks. "I lied because I thought it would make it easier for you to grow up. I thought anger would be lighter than emptiness, but I was wrong." Thomas stepped forward slowly, his hands trembling as he reached out, though he stopped halfway. His eyes glistened with tears that seemed to carry years of regret. "Daniel, I didn't know you existed." "Your mother never told me. I only learned the truth months ago, and it broke me. I had to find you." "I had to see you with my own eyes." Daniel's chest tightened. His voice rose. "You expect me to believe this? After all these years, where were you when we had nothing? Where were you when my mother cried at night?" The boy's words cut through the air like sharp glass. Thomas lowered his head, shame pressing his shoulders down. "I wasn't there because I was kept away, but I can never erase that absence. I can only beg for your forgiveness, even if it takes the rest of my life." Sandra's heart ached as she watched the boy's pain clash with the man's guilt. She knelt beside Daniel, her hand gently resting on his arm. "Daniel, you don't have to forgive him now. You don't even have to believe him right away, but you do deserve to hear the truth, no matter how painful it is." Keanu, who had been standing quietly near the doorway, finally spoke, his voice steady and low. "Sometimes the truth arrives late, but it is still the truth. What matters is what you do with it now." Daniel looked up at him, his eyes wet and desperate. "But how do I know if it's real? How do I know if he's not just saying what I want to hear?" Keanu's gaze held firm. "You don't. Trust isn't given in one moment, it's built piece by piece. Tonight is only the first step." Maria coughed, her body trembling from the effort. Sandra rushed to support her, but Maria lifted her weak hand toward Thomas. "For years I carried the burden of silence. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I only created more wounds. Now it's time to heal, even if it hurts." Tears rolled down Thomas's cheeks as he took Maria's hand gently. "I should have fought harder to stay in your life back then. I should have asked more questions. But I cannot change the past. All I can do now is stand here in the open and not run away again." The room fell into silence, each heartbeat heavy with unspoken emotions. Daniel sank into the chair, his eyes on the floor, his young face twisted with anger, sorrow, and confusion. Sandra felt her chest tighten as she looked at him. She could see the storm inside him, the desire to hate, the longing to belong, the fear of being betrayed again. She knew that silence could break a young soul more than words ever could. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, whatever happens next, you're not facing it alone. You have us." Daniel's lips trembled, but no words came. Keanu walked closer and crouched beside the boy. "You remind me of myself when I was young," he said quietly. "I lost people I loved. I carried anger, confusion, and silence for years. But I learned that letting others in, even slowly, can heal wounds you never thought possible." Daniel lifted his eyes, searching Keanu's calm face. "But what if letting him in hurts me again?" Keanu's eyes softened. "Then at least you'll know you were brave enough to try. Sometimes bravery isn't about fighting. It's about opening the door to hope, even when it scares you." A faint sob escaped from Daniel's chest. He pressed the notebook to his heart, the same way his mother had once done. His mother watched with weak eyes, relief flickering across her tired face. Suddenly, Maria's breathing grew uneven and her body shook. Sandra panicked, holding her tighter. "Keanu, we need to call for help now." Keanu rushed to his phone, dialing emergency services with sharp focus. Thomas stood frozen, terror gripping him, while Daniel clutched his mother's hand tightly, crying out, "Please don't leave me, Mother, please." The minutes that followed felt like hours. Paramedics arrived quickly, rushing into the room. They lifted Maria carefully onto a stretcher. Sandra held her hand until the very last second, whispering, "You're going to be all right. We're with you." As they carried her out, Maria's faint voice called back, "Take care of him. Promise me again." "I promise," Sandra whispered, her tears streaming. Keanu, Sandra, Daniel, and Thomas followed as the stretcher was taken into the waiting ambulance. The night air was cold, the sirens sharp against the silence of the streets. Sandra climbed into the ambulance with Maria, refusing to leave her side. Keanu stayed close with Daniel, placing a strong hand on the boy's shoulder. Thomas walked behind them, his eyes filled with regret but also with a glimmer of determination. In that single ride, 4 lives that had been strangers in different ways were now bound together by one fragile thread, the hope of saving Maria and the chance of healing old wounds. But none of them knew what truth awaited them in the hospital, or how much deeper the night's secrets would go. The ambulance raced through the night, its sirens crying out into the silence of the city. Sandra sat inside, gripping Maria's hand with both of hers, whispering words of comfort even as fear clawed at her chest. Maria's breathing was shallow, her eyes flickering open and closed as if she were drifting between 2 worlds. The paramedics worked quickly, but Sandra could see the fragility in Maria's face, the way life seemed to be slipping through her fingers like sand. Outside the ambulance, Keanu held tightly onto Daniel, who stood frozen in shock. The boy's small frame shook as he tried to process the chaos, his eyes wet with tears that refused to stop. Thomas trailed behind them, each step heavy with guilt, his hands clenched tightly as if punishing himself for every year he had been absent. When they finally reached the hospital, everything moved fast. Maria was rushed into the emergency room, the swinging doors closing in front of them. Sandra pressed her forehead against the cold glass window, whispering, "Please hold on, Maria. Don't leave him yet." Daniel tugged on her sleeve, his voice trembling. "What if she doesn't make it? What if I lose her tonight?" Sandra dropped to her knees, holding the boy close. "You won't lose her alone. We are here. I promise you, no matter what happens, you will never be alone again." Keanu placed a steady hand on Daniel's back, his calm presence grounding both of them. Hope is fragile, but it's powerful. We must hold on to it now. Hours passed. The waiting room grew quiet, the hum of machines and the faint footsteps of nurses filling the silence. Daniel sat between Sandra and Keanu, his head resting on Sandra's shoulder, exhaustion tugging at him. Thomas sat across from them, his hands covering his face, silent tears slipping through the cracks of his fingers. Finally, the doctor walked in. Everyone stood at once, hearts pounding. The doctor's face was serious, but not without a trace of compassion. "Maria is stable for now," he said gently. "She's weak, but she's fighting. However, she needs treatment immediately. Without it, her chances will fade quickly." Daniel rushed forward, desperation in his eyes. "What kind of treatment?" Tell me what she needs, please. The doctor looked at him, then at the others. She needs specialized care, medication, and time in a proper facility. It will be expensive. Very expensive. The words fell like stones in the room. Sandra's heart clenched. Money was not the problem for her, but she could see the shame flicker in Daniel's young face. The boy lowered his eyes, whispering, "We don't have anything. Not even enough for food some days." Before Sandra could speak, Thomas stepped forward. His voice cracked but carried determination. "Let me handle it. I owe her everything. I owe both of them everything." Daniel's eyes snapped up, anger flashing. "You? You think you can suddenly appear and fix everything with money? Where were you when we needed you the most?" The boy's words pierced through the air, sharp and raw. Thomas staggered as if struck, his lips trembling. "You're right. I wasn't there, and I will never forgive myself for that. But let me at least try now. Let me carry some of this weight." Keanu stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't about proving yourself, Thomas. It's about Maria's life. If you can help, then help. What matters now is action, not the past." Sandra took Daniel's hand gently. "Sometimes life gives us one chance to rebuild, Daniel. Maybe this is his chance. Maybe this is your chance, too." The boy shook his head, tears spilling. "I don't know if I can ever forgive him, but I don't want to lose my mother. Not like this." Sandra hugged him close, whispering softly, "Then let love guide you, not anger. Anger will eat you alive. Love will keep you strong." The hospital staff began preparing paperwork, and Thomas left briefly to arrange the funds. When he returned, his hands were trembling, but he held a folder filled with documents. He handed them to the doctor, his voice steady. "Do whatever it takes. Don't let her slip away." As Maria was moved into a private room for her treatment, Sandra and Keanu followed closely. Daniel clung to Sandra's hand, his small fingers gripping with desperate strength. When they entered, Maria opened her eyes faintly, her voice weak but clear enough to be heard. "You all came. You stayed." Sandra brushed her hair gently, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're not leaving you." "Not now, not ever." Daniel leaned close, whispering, "Mother, please fight. I still need you. I still have so much to tell you." Maria smiled faintly, her trembling hand brushing his cheek. "You've already told me everything, just by being here." For a moment, silence fell again, but it was a silence filled with love, not fear. Later that night, as the city outside slept, Sandra, Keanu, Daniel, and Thomas sat together in the hospital room. The boy had fallen asleep against Sandra's side, the notebook clutched tightly in his arms. Maria slept peacefully, her breathing steady under the care of the machines. Keanu looked at Sandra, his eyes calm but filled with unspoken emotion. This night began with a gift, but it's turning into something much larger than either of us could have imagined. Sandra nodded, her eyes on Daniel's sleeping face. "Sometimes the real gift is not what's in the box. It's the people fate places in our lives." Thomas sat silently, watching his son, his face torn between regret and hope. He whispered, almost to himself, "Maybe I've been given one last chance to be the man I should have been all along." But as peace settled over the room for the first time in hours, no one noticed the nurse who lingered too long by the doorway, her eyes watching them with something more than professional concern. Something in her expression carried weight, as if she too knew a piece of the truth that no one else had yet spoken. The faint glow of the hospital monitors cast soft shadows on the walls, and for a moment everything felt calm. Maria was resting, her breathing steady. Daniel was asleep against Sandra's side, and Keanu stood by the window, gazing at the city lights beyond. Thomas sat quietly, his hands folded, staring at his son as if trying to make up for every lost year just by looking at him. But the calm was deceptive. Sandra noticed the nurse again, the same one who had hovered at the doorway earlier. This time, she entered the room slowly, her expression unreadable. She adjusted Maria's drip, then paused, looking at Thomas with eyes that seemed to recognize him. "You're Thomas," she said softly, almost like an accusation. Thomas stiffened, his voice cracked. "Do I know you?" The nurse's lips pressed together as though she was weighing a heavy decision. Finally, she whispered, "I knew your family. I worked at the clinic where Maria used to come years ago. You were not told the truth, Thomas. You were sent away deliberately." The room froze. Keanu turned from the window, his calm gaze sharpening. Sandra straightened, her arms tightening around Daniel, who stirred at the sound of raised voices. "What do you mean?" Sandra asked carefully, her voice steady but urgent. The nurse's eyes glistened. "Maria never wanted to hide your child from you, Thomas. She tried to reach you, but people around her stopped the letters. They told her you had moved on, that you didn't care. And they told you she wanted nothing to do with you. Both of you lived in lies built by others." Thomas's hands shook violently, his eyes filling with tears. "All these years, I thought she abandoned me. I thought she chose silence. And all this time," his voice broke, "it wasn't her. It wasn't me. It was the world between us." Maria stirred weakly, her eyes fluttering open. Her voice was faint but clear. "It's true. I tried to tell you. I wrote letters. So many letters. But they never reached you." Daniel sat up suddenly, his young face filled with shock and pain. "So, it wasn't either of you? You both wanted each other? You both wanted me?" Tears rolled down Maria's cheeks. "Yes, Daniel. You were never unwanted. You were always the piece of us that gave life meaning." Thomas bent over her bed, his forehead resting against her hand, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I failed you both by not fighting harder. But please, let me fight now. Let me be here. However late." Daniel looked between his mother and father, his chest heaving with the weight of emotions too big for his young heart. Then he turned to Keanu and Sandra, his voice breaking. "What do I do with all of this? How do I live with so many truths?" Keanu knelt before him, his steady eyes locking with the boy's trembling ones. "You take one step at a time. You let yourself feel the pain, but you also let yourself see the love that's here now. The past is heavy, Daniel, but the future doesn't have to carry the same weight. You can choose differently." Sandra hugged the boy, whispering into his ear. "And you don't have to choose alone. We're all here with you. Your story doesn't end in pain. It begins with healing." Maria's breathing grew weaker again, her strength fading. She reached out, her trembling hand touching both Daniel's and Thomas's. Promise me you'll walk together. That you won't let anger divide you again." Tears blurred Daniel's vision, but he nodded fiercely. "I promise, Mother. I'll try. I'll hold on to you by holding on to him." Thomas choked on his tears. "I promise, too. I'll never walk away again, no matter what it takes." Maria smiled faintly, her eyes closing as a tear slid down her cheek. "Then I can rest, knowing love has won." Silence filled the room as her breathing slowed, then steadied into a gentle rhythm, as though peace had finally touched her. She drifted into sleep, this time deeper, calmer, without fear. Sandra brushed her hair tenderly, whispering, "Rest, Maria. You've carried enough." Daniel clung to the notebook, pressing it against his chest. "This will remind me of her voice, of everything she believed." Keanu placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "And now you'll have more voices too, ours. Whenever you doubt, we'll be here." In the days that followed, Maria remained under treatment, slowly gaining strength. Thomas visited every day, rebuilding piece by piece what years of silence had broken. Sandra and Keanu stood like anchors, guiding Daniel through every storm of emotion. The boy began to smile again, not because the pain had vanished, but because he knew he no longer carried it alone. Weeks later, when Maria was strong enough to leave the hospital, she stepped into the sunlight with Daniel holding one hand and Thomas holding the other. Sandra and Keanu walked beside them, their presence like a shield of kindness. The world outside had not changed, but for them, everything was different. Sandra glanced at Keanu, her eyes soft. "You know, that night when you came with the notebook, I thought it was just a small gift, but it turned into a journey none of us expected." Keanu's smile was gentle, his eyes calm. Sometimes the smallest gifts open the largest doors. Daniel, walking between his parents, looked up at Sandra and Keanu. "Thank you for being the reason," my mother smiled again, "and for giving me a family I never thought I'd have." The five of them walked together into the brightness of the day, carrying scars, carrying hope, carrying love that had been broken but rebuilt. And though the future was uncertain, they knew one truth clearly now: kindness, respect, and humility had bound them in a way no force could break. For the first time in a long time, They were not defined by what they had lost, but by what they had found, each other.